Hey everybody, Sarah here. So today I'm going to be doing a book review on a book that I've seen in a couple of pet stores near me that you guys might also have seen in a few pet stores near you. Before we jump in though, please remember to subscribe, like, share with anybody who you think is going to find this useful or interesting, and also remember that you can become a member of this channel. It's $2 a month and you get exclusive content like little videos that I record here and there that I'll upload just as a sort of little fun thing. It doesn't like take away from the channel. If you are not a member, you're still going to get all the educational content, but you just get a little bit extra for the members who want to financially support the channel. Lord knows I could need it. For anybody who has been watching the last few weeks, I've had a lot of respiratory problems, and it's not COVID, but it could be who knows what. I have asthma, I have allergies, there's a lot of things going on, but I have a lot of medical bills right now. So if you want to support me, support this channel, that is a great way to do that. But if you don't have any way to support financially, that is perfectly fine. You can support by liking, sharing, and just commenting. And I highly suggest that anybody who might want to win this book actually comment on this video, because I do a giveaway of every book that I review on this channel. So that reminds me, I need to do the giveaway for last month's book. Now, if you'll remember, the amazing book that we reviewed last month was Corn Snake Care by Charles Darwin. And this did not get a super great rating. In fact, this was one of the worst books I've ever read. I'm really sorry to whoever wrote it, but honestly, it's not good for English speakers. And it just didn't have near the information in it that I expected. Plus, the font is like huge in it. So I'm going to draw the names out of the hat. Now, there were only 3 names who commented, and one of them even requested that the book be destroyed if they win. So we will see who wins. I actually have a hat today, so I'm just pulling out random name. And it looks like Tessera Craft, who I believe first name is actually Matthew. So thank you for commenting, Matthew. And if you would like this book, send me an email. It is sarahssnakeshop@gmail.com. I'll put it down in the description so you can access it easily. And I also wanted to thank all of my current members. I don't have the list in front of me, but I'll put it over here. You guys are amazing. I appreciate you guys being here so much. I know that I mentioned membership earlier, but I wanted to make sure to give a special thank you and put your guys' names up, because it really means so much to me that you guys are helping me support this channel. And now I'm going to actually jump into the video about the new book. So this is the book that we are reviewing. It is Corn Snakes: Facts, Advice, and Care on Breeding with full color photos. And it is actually, well, we'll get into how good of a book it is. But if you would like to win this book, you can comment down below. Anyone who comments is entered to win. It's free shipping in the US. If you're outside of the US, I can still manage to ship to you. You may just have to pay for shipping in that case. So I want to go over the 3 main criteria with which we judge these books. The first one is, how accurate is the information in the book? Is the information provided, actually good information? The second is, how easy is the book to understand from an English speaker's perspective? I'm an English speaker. I know that not everyone who watches this channel is a native English speaker, so thank you for being here if you're from another country. But since this is mostly English speaking and I'm an English speaker and these books are written in English, we're trying to see how easy it is to read, how good is the grammar, stuff like that, for English speakers specifically. And the last criteria is it as advertised? And if not, how close is it? We judge this on a scale of 1 to 10 for each category, and then average the 3 at the end to get its final score. To see an example of a 1 out of 10 book, you can watch the very first video in this series. I'll link it above for you guys if you'd like to go watch it. It was definitely terrible, and I don't recommend it. I'm really sorry. And I originally, I think, gave it like a 3 out of 10, but because it was the first video, it was hard for me to really compare and contrast with other things. So it kind of ended up getting a better score than it deserved ultimately. And a 10 out of 10 book is this book right here, Corn Snakes by Bill and Kathy Love. This is going to be a 10 out of 10 book. It is probably the best book on the market. We're not reviewing this today. It is something I will review and give away eventually, but I just kind of wanted to give you some context on the differences that we're talking about between a 1 out of 10 and 10 out of 10 book. And I think that you might be a little surprised about today's book. So we're going to start with criteria number 1. How accurate is the information? And honestly, I was very, very pleasantly surprised with this book. I honestly, this is going to be a positive review. Spoiler alert, it's going to be positive. There was very few places in this book where I was reading and I thought, well, that's wrong. And this was published in 2011, so it is a little bit aged. It's a, 11-year-old book now. So there is some information that's outdated, and that just happens with a lot of these older books. We've reviewed a couple of older books already on this channel, and sometimes, like I said, it just happens. Things evolve and change, and when you get older copies of older books, this is the second edition of this book, by the way. It's by the Bartletts. I don't think I mentioned that, but when you get an older book, sometimes this information just is old and there's nothing you can do about it, but it does take points off as far as like ultimately me recommending this book or not. So in the first category of how accurate is the information, because there is some old information and there were definitely some things that I had to like cross out and be like, no, do not. I am going to give this a 5 out of 10 in the accuracy of information, and that's nothing against this book. And I know that like I was saying, oh, this is so positive. It is a positive outcome for this book. Just the accuracy of information because of how old it is, and for some things that just were never correct. I cannot, out of good conscience, give this a higher score in that category than 5 out of 10. In criteria number 2, how easy is it to read from an English speaker's perspective? I thought it was very, very easy to read. It was laid out very well. It's small, but it has a lot of very straightforward, very good information. And you can see the text. I'm not going to show a whole bunch of the book because there are copyright things, but the text is a reasonable size. It's not gigantic like you see in these other really small books that have basically no information in them. And the grammar itself was really good. I'm kind of a stickler for grammar and spelling and things like that, just because I'm dyslexic, and so the way that I learned how to read when I was a kid, if things vary from that or different from that too much, it's difficult for me to read because of my dyslexia. But this was very straightforward, very easy to read. The sections were a perfect size, I thought, and I could sit down and read this in less than an hour. As the ease of reading goes for an English speaker, I'm going to give this book an 8 out of 10. It was very straightforward, very easy to read. There were a few parts where I thought it could have been maybe a little bit better, so I'm not going to give it the full 10 out of 10 for that, but still, 8 out of 10, great score. The last criteria is it as advertised? This specifically says facts and advice on care and breeding with full color photos. All of the photos were full color, so that's good. And it did have facts and advice on care and breeding, and there was even a little bit more in there than just for care and breeding. So honestly, this gets it just generally a very, very great book. I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10 on the is it as advertised. I think it's great, and because it's small, if you go and you pick it up and you look at it, it really does exceed expectations with its tiny size. So overall, this score gets a 7.666 out of 10. And so we're going to round that up to 8 out of 10. And I think that that's good. I would actually probably give this more like a 7.5, to be honest with you. I would actually kind of go down. I've been trying to do whole numbers so that it's easier. You know, we just have our 3 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10 or 8 out of 10. But like, I wouldn't quite put this at the 8 out of 10 level. If I had to round up, I would. But I would kind of keep it at that 7.5. I feel like it's better than a 7 out of 10, but maybe like not quite what I would consider to be 8 out of 10. Either way, however you want to skew it, 7.5 to 8 out of 10 is what I would give for this book. Now, I'm going to go through some things in this book that I wanted to highlight, whether positive or negative. I'm just going to go page by page with this. So in the front, we do have a table of contents, which I love. I love when there's a table of contents that has actual accurate page numbers. The very first one that we reviewed in this series had a table of contents with page numbers, but then there were no actual numbers on the pages themselves. And so we, at this point, at the very least, have both page numbers and a table of contents, and that's really nice because some books that we've reviewed even did not have a table of contents. There's also a glossary and an index in the back along with some additional helpful information. Highly recommend that. Like, that is great. I love seeing that in a book. It just means they went the extra mile for the reader, and I really like that. So in the front of the book, they go through some statistics and how they say about 78% of the snakes in the world are colubrids, which is something I didn't know. And so I love seeing things like this that I didn't know, and I'm learning something myself by reading these books. And so I think that that's really cool. So we do get into some outdated information here, kind of in the very beginning where they talk about the old species name for corn snakes. It is now Pantherophis guttata guttata, and it used to be Alepe guttata guttata. And so this is, like I said, it's just an older book, so it's bound to have some of that outdated information, but I did want to mention it. They also have a map in here. I don't want to like show things just for copyright purposes, but they have a map of where corn snakes are located in the US as opposed to other like similar snakes. So it shows where the Great Plains rat snake resides as opposed to the corn snake. And I really like being able to see maps like that in a book like this. I think this is actually the first time we've seen a map like that in any of the books that I've reviewed. And so this just, again, it goes the extra mile for me to put a map like that in there. I think it's really good for the reader. There are some other interesting little things in here that I thought that it did really well on. It kind of answers the question, can snakes hear? I get that question a lot, like, can snakes actually hear if they don't have ears? And so this answers that question. The answer is basically yes. It's not exactly the same as us, but basically yes. They do have sort of a sense of hearing. And there's other things that they mention in here, like locality differences, which I really appreciate, and how different localities can be so vastly different from each other. So for example, snakes from the Florida Keys are going to stay a lot smaller than snakes that are further north, like in Okeechobee. They also have this whole section on other similar related species, and I really like that because it shows not only species that are related, such as the Great Plains rat snake, but then it also contrasts that with snakes that look like they might be related but are not related, such as the Mexican night snake, which does look kind of similar to a corn snake. I'll kind of show you this picture. I could probably get away with showing one picture there, but yeah, so it kind of looks similar to a corn snake a little bit. And one thing I really like about this book is that it does cater to beginners very well. If you're going to have a book like this that's kind of small, you can read it in one sitting, and you're going to have it sold in pet stores where people maybe haven't even bought their first snake yet. I think it's really good to show these contrasting things. Some of the other books in the pile to be reviewed are a little bit more advanced. So the Loves books are a little bit more advanced. They can be for beginners too, but they do have a lot of advanced information in them that are a little bit more technical as well. And that's not a bad thing. I think it's really good to have all that technical stuff in there. But with this, it definitely simplifies it and makes it really easy for what I believe to be the target audience for this book. And that is people who are just now getting into corn snakes, people who are just now buying their first corn snake maybe, or they're just going through their very first breeding season with corn snakes. They give some great advice in here on how to pick out corn snakes, how it's better to get a corn snake that's not a tiny itty bitty baby. But if you're gonna get a snake, especially from a pet store, make sure you know that it's eating. Ask them what it's eating, how often it's eating, how often it's eaten with them, stuff like that. They really go over that really well here. It isn't quite as detailed as the Loves book that I reviewed a few months ago, but it still has a lot of that good information and it still overviews it very well. There is a section in here that I find a bit questionable, especially for beginners, where it tells you how to collect corn snakes from the wild. I personally would not have included this information in the book, maybe just briefly gone over, like, this is a thing that has happened and you can do, but it's generally not recommended to just go out, catch a corn snake, and keep it. For one thing, there are a lot of states that prevent you from doing that, prevent you from going out and catching a native animal and keeping it. A lot of states do not allow people to keep native animals. It's that way here in Indiana where I live. I cannot go out and catch a garter snake in my backyard and keep it as a pet. Even though garter snakes are kept as pets all over the US and many other places, because of the laws here, I can't just go out and catch one. And so I think that they're kind of walking on thin ice a little bit when it comes to like how to catch and keep your own corn snakes. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Like, it has to happen. We had to have caught snakes in the wild to have them in captivity. And I think it's good occasionally to have a wild caught in your collection, especially if you're a big breeder and you want to add new blood. I think that's a good idea, but I don't think that it's something that we should be recommending to just the average Joe who has a corn snake. That's just my opinion. And honestly, that's part of the reason that this book did not get quite as high of a score as it could have in the first criteria. There's a whole section in here on shipping and receiving snakes, and I think that that's also really great. It doesn't go into super great detail on how to ship, but it definitely at least says, like, hey, there's an option to ship. Find a breeder. Breeders are going to be the best source of healthy snakes probably, so that's okay. And shipping is also okay and has been done for so long that we've pretty much perfected the art of it at this point. If only the shipping companies would perfect their art of delivering. No offense to anybody who works at a shipping company, but I have had snakes arrived in completely crushed boxes, and I was surprised that the snakes were alive. So, you know, we do our best as people who ship. But just keep in mind, like, we can't control what the shipping companies do, and hopefully if the shipping company makes a mistake like that, that they fix it, or at least pay for it or something. Sometimes they don't, and that's unfortunate, but it's just something that I thought was really cool in here that they talked about. You just don't see that in too many books. And a lot of people I know are very wary of shipping. And so I think that this book would be really good for anyone to get before buying their corn snake to read, so that they would know what the options are in that case. There's a whole section in here on different morphs, which is what I'm going to be critiquing the most personally. I try to keep my bias out of it as much as I can, but morphs are kind of my thing. If you guys don't know, I have written 2 corn snake morph books. One goes over the base mutations and one goes over the selectively bred types. I do plan to eventually do one on some combinations, or maybe even combine all 3 of them into a big book that talks about everything. We'll see. I'm not 100% sure what my plans are for the future there, but sarahsnakeshop.com, you can go to shop and there's 2 different ebooks you can get, and I would really love that. It also helps support the channel, helps support me, and everything else. So if you are interested in learning a little bit more about corn snake morphs, that is going to be where you can get my corn snake books. So in the morph section of the book, they go over Punnett squares and basic genetics, which I think is always a good idea. I do have some like Punnett square stuff on my channel, but it's not perfect. It's not great. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a biologist. I just wanted to sort of show my personal audience how I personally calculate gene mutations, and it's not the same as what typical people would do with a Punnett square, but it's still like the math works. And if you are interested in learning that, I will link the video and or playlist above for you guys to go check out. They say in this book that anerythristic is also axanthic, and those are 2 different pigments, but both of our anerythristic mutations are also kind of axanthic, and I talked a little bit about that in a recent video, link that above as well if you want to go watch. But when we're talking about anerythrism, we're really talking about removing red pigments. However, we do know that there are a lot more yellow pigments that can show in a corn snake than what we see in a typical anerythristic type, either anery A or B. And so it kind of is also axanthic, but if we just had axanthic, it would be a very red snake with no yellow, similar to maybe like a cherry, which cherry is not technically axanthic. Cherry is a sort of hypererythrism, which is more reds, but cherries typically don't have quite as much yellow, so they're an okay example of what just an axanthic would look like in a corn snake. Anerythristic means removal of reds. Now, if we just removed reds and nothing else, we actually would end up with something similar to like a caramel maybe, or maybe something similar to buff or toffee, something that's going to continue to have that yellow pigment a little bit, but it just removes that harsh red color in corn snakes. So technically our anerythristic types are actually also axanthic types in a way, so they're not wrong, but it's just not something that we really like talk about that much, and so it's kind of confusing information. It's not wrong information, but I just wanted to make a note of it because it's in here. They go over some very, very basic morphs in here. They talk about caramel. There's a picture of a butter, and there's a picture of an amelanistic, which they call it albino in the book. I don't agree with that, but I also don't disagree with it enough. Again, I think that this book is targeted to beginners, so that's okay that the term albino is in there. That way, people who are new to the hobby can look at the term albino next to the term amelanistic and start to associate those 2 with each other, so that they know that that's what albino technically means in corn snakes. Not technically, but colloquially means in corn snakes. We don't say albino just because there's so many different pigments that could be removed. So we say amel or amelanistic in place of that when we're removing melanin, which is what most like normal people who don't have corn snakes are going to think of when they think of albinism. They're going to think of that removal of melanin. I'm not going to linger too much longer on this. I did want to mention, though, that there was a point when they talked about pepper and how pepper and pewter are the same thing, but they are not. So here they say that pepper is charcoal and diffused, and pewter is the same thing. So pewter is charcoal and diffused, but pepper is not. Pepper was a term for granite, which is anerythristic type A and diffused. But how the picture that they showed, however, is not actually diffused at all. It looks like it's just an anery or maybe an anery charcoal combination, something like that. It might even be a ghost, but it's definitely not diffused. That was kind of the only like gripe that I had with that. Like if you're going, like they didn't put pictures in of all the different morphs. Like there's a bunch of different morphs shown on here, but not pictures of all of them. They're just described. So if you're going to put in a photo, to me, it seems like you ought to put in the right one, especially when they didn't put photos in for all of the morphs. I would kind of understand maybe a little bit better if they'd put in photos of all of the morphs and then had one mistake. But if you're going to put a photo in to some of them and not all of them, just make the ones they put in correct. That's all. That's my only gripe with that. There's a whole other section on housing and feeding. I thought the housing section was just fine. It was perfect in my opinion. And the feeding section was mostly good, except for the part where they said that you can give your snake up to 5 meal items at a time. I don't recommend giving your corn snake 5 meal items at a time, like ever. I don't really see why that would be necessary. Corn snakes, the biggest they're gonna get is maybe big enough for a like small rat, maybe a weanling rat. You're not gonna get a corn snake that needs 5 meal items. The only time that I've ever fed a corn snake 5 meal items was when I had a rescue corn snake that had a 90-degree like kink in his neck, and he had to only eat like fuzzy mice or maybe pinky rats. And so yes, we had to feed him 3 or 4 at a time in order to get him the calories that he needed. But still, 3 or 4 is not quite 5. So I don't recommend giving 5. I recommend maximum like 3, because at some point you are going to overload your snake with food, and that's not good. You don't want to risk regurgitation. So they do also go over some diseases, and they go over some other ailments that the snakes can have, which I think is really good. No gripes with that. Would highly recommend those sections, especially the just overall health section, how to know if your snake is healthy, what to look for, things like that. And just a basic like on how to breed. I thought that that was fine. They talk about how to make your own incubator. I don't recommend making your own incubator unless you have incubated a few, years worth of eggs, just so you get an idea of what works and what doesn't before you make your own. I made that mistake when I first started. I saw online somewhere someone made their own incubator, so I did the same thing. I got a styrofoam box and a heat pad, and I did all this stuff, and I actually ended up losing like 24 eggs, like 2 clutches worth of eggs because of that. So just make sure that you have tried the conventional way for a little bit before you try to make your own. It's not that it's wrong to make your own, just like, again, I feel like that part maybe wasn't good for the intended audience. If the intended audience is beginners in corn snakes, which I would say that that's what the intended audience of this book should be, is beginners, then I would not recommend making your own incubator. Again, it's fine to mention it, but I think it should be, again, like in passing. Like, people can make their own incubators by doing this and this, but, please incubate responsibly. So that is going to be it for this review of this book. I actually really enjoyed it, and I was pleasantly surprised by it. Like I said, there were a few things here and there that I was a little iffy on, especially for the target audience of the book. But overall, I highly recommend. I recommend this book for anyone who is getting ready to own a snake but does not own a corn snake yet, or has maybe just purchased their first corn snake and they just want a general overview of things. I think this would be great. You can sit down and read it in one sitting, and it might be a little bit cheaper and easier for you to find than some of the other books that I've mentioned. I'm going to end this video now because my phone's running out of memory, but thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next video, which is going to be a morph deep dive, but I don't know which one yet, so I'll see you then.